Well, welcome to this webinar. It doesn't appear that there's any questions or announcements for the start of the presentation, so I'm just going to jump into it, and I'm going to be talking about what I call language considerations for mobile apps and devices, and looking at some of the issues surrounding working with touch gestures and voice. By the way, I'm Joe Walensky, and I'm not going to have this video on all the time, but I just thought you could see what I look like, since I always think it's kind of odd to listen to a whole webinar and never see the person that is doing the talking. So that's me. And I have I think about 40, just under 30 to 40 minutes of information to present. And then I'll open it up for questions. And since we have a lot of people, I'll probably keep everybody muted and ask you to type something into the question box. By the way, do that throughout the presentation. I'll try and keep an eye on that. And if I see a question, I'll be happy to break in the middle of the presentation. So let me just switch back to the slides. And just say that this is an area that I've been working with quite a lot over the last 2 to 3 years. I wrote a book about a year and a half ago about doing user assistance for mobile apps, and so a big part of that was thinking about UI text and what that means as we move forward. And I do recognize that there are 2 groups participating today, and I think there's information here that are useful for both sides. I've been involved in user assistance for quite a long time. I'm currently working on some projects with Blink Interactive, which is a UX design firm in Seattle. And so we'll be looking at kind of from both perspectives, hopefully, and if that's not happening, feel free to guide me a little bit with your questions. Well, first of all, I do want to say that I think overall we're at a really major inflection point in the software development world in general, especially with respects to the types of interactions that our users have with the user interface. And that's going to mean just a lot of new learning, a lot of new techniques, and just new and innovative ideas about thinking about what we do. And I'm pretty old. I've been in the software industry for about 25 years now, and since 1989 through, well, about when the iPhone came out, so 2 decades, essentially the only interaction types were, for the most part, broadly, were the keyboard and a mouse. And so for 2 decades, it was relatively, well, it was an area of development that you didn't have to spend much time on. You just were developing for desktop monitors, certain range of screens, a certain range of resolutions, but essentially everybody was able to work with that quite easily. And then the iPhone came around, and all of a sudden that changed. And so I think it's just important to recognize that this is a big point in time, and that if you haven't been in the industry for very long, you might not see it that the same way, but it definitely appears that way to me. And so I use that to measure the importance of the things I do, and kind of give myself a little bit of slack in terms of not necessarily knowing what to do in a particular situation. It's a time for coming up with a lot of new ideas. And another challenge that we have, just besides that inflection point, is all of the proprietary interactions that are happening with different platforms, a lot of customized user interfaces, and I'm going to go into that stuff in detail. But what I have at the bottom of this slide in yellow is basically the core of my message, and I'll explain that a little bit, but if you wanted to hang up after that, you essentially have my core point. And these 2 points refer to kind of two different audiences. First of all, in terms of the audience that is involved in user interface design, visual design, the UX side of things. I've found that when it comes to the text and sometimes images that appear in the user interface, that the analysis or the design doesn't go down to a word level, to a word or phrase level. And I think that's something that that ideally more people would embrace, is to do that type of analysis. We talk a lot about content and how to write for the web, and that's been around for a long time, but very few organizations really analyze individual words and phrases. So I'm going to talk about that in more detail. I think that's an area that can definitely be improved in the UX community. And then for the technical communication community, which I'm also a part of, user testing is a key to any of the things that I'm going to be talking about. If you haven't tested your word and phrase and those choices, then you don't really know whether or not what you're doing is effective or not. And unfortunately, user testing isn't something that's commonly done for documentation or user assistance, but it's just as important as for other aspects of the software design. And the title slide was mentioned touch and voice, but I mean, this really is an inflection point because we have so many different interaction types. And if you haven't taken the time to really just think about it collectively, yeah, it's enormous what's happened in such a quick time. So we obviously had the keyboard and the mouse, but then touch came along with finger gestures, then hand gestures with things like the Kinect, voice controls, which have been around for a long time actually in software, like Microsoft Office has supported that for a long time, but it's really just in the past couple of years that seems like a technology we're definitely going to be working with quite a lot. The stylus has had somewhat of a resurgence for certain devices. Near-field communications is an interaction type that maybe you haven't been thinking about, but helping people understand how they're actually going to position their device with respect to other objects. That's something that we're going to have to be thinking about. And the decades-old and somewhat hated remote control for our home entertainment systems, that's not going away. In fact, that remote may end up being amplified as we have more advanced home entertainment systems where that's your main interface with software applications. And so all this is swirling around, and we need to be thinking about how to help people know how to work with our software with all this going on. And then on top of that, we have all these different platforms, including ones you may not be thinking of, like automotive, for example, Ford Sync. And I'll talk more about automotive a little bit later. But to just get into some examples, just showing areas that you may not have thought about where there may need to be some type of helpful information provided to the users is that the multi-touch controls that are built into a lot of today's apps and more apps, they're not things that you can necessarily find very easy. And if you don't know that they're there and the app doesn't do something to let you know that they're there, then you're not going to know that they're there and can't benefit from that. The Quick Office is an example where it's possible to increase the height of a row in the Excel sheet, but you have to know to press and hold on one of the lines in between two of the row numbers. And if you do that, then the arrows appear, and then you can spread the row to increase the height. in PhotoPad. You can move around your image within that palette area in addition to adjusting the image itself. But unless you found that by moving your finger around, there's nothing there that tells you to do that. The Acutera example, you can get information from place marks like the flag, as long as you know that by pressing on the blue part of that flag stick that a pop-up will appear. All of those essentially are invisible. One of the issues here, well, first of all, is whether or not from a design perspective, you want to have those type of multi-touch invisible controls built into your app. It may very well be that you don't want to do that at all, but if it is something that you're doing, then you're going to have a way to let people know how to work with that. And assuming that you do have things like that and you need to help people find out how to work with your software through words or images, then I think you really have to think about word choices, and you really have to test those word choices. And as I'm going to show in a little bit, those word choices are going to change depending on the mobile platform. The point I try to get across here is that I think you really need to test these things at the word level, especially with small screen devices where we have such limited screen real estate, and it may be just one or two words that are carrying the day in that user interface. But what I've found is that many organizations just put in the first word that comes in the programmer's head or the designer's head, and there's not really a testing for that. But it certainly can be tested in a variety of ways, like anything else that's part of our user interface. I first encountered this in a project that I worked on for an iPhone app called Timeworks, and that's an app for consultants and contractors to keep track of their time. And one of the controls there is a timer, which once you start it will keep track of your time on a task, and when you stop it, it'll automatically take that time and apply it to a particular task and record it and save it to be used for invoicing. And once you started that timer, if you wanted to go back to the app, the first word that was discussed, the term they have in there, was dismiss. And it was found that users were reluctant to press that button because they thought they would be losing the recorded time, whereas actually all that's going on is that the timer is going sort of into the background of that particular app. And by doing just a small usability test and getting out a thesaurus and checking different word choices, it turned out that the word hide definitely changed people's perceptions about what that particular button choice meant. So it was purely that, looking up different word options, not assuming that you necessarily know the best one, and then do a test to find out what actually seems to work. And there are a lot of apps that have what I like to think of as custom interactions. So there's taps and there's double taps and there's a touch and hold, but the way that it's integrated with what the app is trying to do may in many cases need the user to be in a different mindset for different types of apps, and so having some kind of explanation can be useful. The TunePaint app that I have there has a somewhat unconventional response to taps and double taps. The AutoCAD software has a way to select things that's like working on the desktop with a mouse, but a little different than how we think about working, selecting something from a touch gesture. And then that wait bot example in the middle, that help pane right there essentially is because if you turn the entire phone sideways, you'll get a completely different view. So not just the same view going to landscape, but a different view, and a view you won't get in portrait. And how do you let a user know about that? I mean, you might fall into it, but the entire app is set up for portrait except for this one activity. Now, in terms of coming up for, figuring out, maybe looking at what other organizations are doing and trying to come to your own consensus about the way to move forward, I think it's always helpful to look at what the developers of the platform are doing, and the Apple user guides for their devices are a good place to start. And by the way, you may not have realized even that Apple has user guides for all of their products, iPod, iPad, iPhone, and multiple versions of those, and in different formats: PDF, web apps, and also iBooks. And when you go into that information, you can kind of look to see what vocabulary that Apple is using, but even Apple has to at times come up with sort of a supplemental language to describe certain things that aren't just described by simple tap, double tap, pinch, and zoom. For example, working with the camera, there's a different set of verbs there about setting things, turning things on or off, focusing the camera, using the zoom. And the way that they have it presented there actually ends up using less language than if you had to use the tap, double tap language to explain what's going on. Another area that we have to think about in terms of what we may need to support for our users is one that you may not have even thought about, which is when you have hardware customizations where the specific device controls are different than what is in the overall software platform. So for an example, that image on the left is a mosaic of a number of button bars for a series of Android phones, and these were all the different arrangements to essentially do the same set of controls, but they look different, they're organized in a different sequence, and if your app requires an interaction with those types of customized controls, do you know that it's going to work effectively on those different devices, that the controls that you expected to be there are in fact there? And then you might have something like an app that is using standard controls that you'd find on a phone, a tablet, and a desktop, and then suddenly it's being displayed on a very custom device like the Xperia Play, where essentially you can work with the application using game controllers. And I don't know if this video is going to work out, and then with gestures, this is just a short clip. Even more different types of interactions that we may have to think about how we would explain to our customers. In any of these situations, I have these kind of what I've been calling the 3 C's, or the 4 C's, and the 4 C's have actually moved me quite a bit away from how I would have traditionally worked with user assistance information, text and images in software before mobile apps, And these sets of principles, I think, or I at least think it's something to consider. First of all, and I'll use this example from Google Earth for that. So when you look at Google Earth on an iPad or an Nexus 7, the first thing that comes up is a small box that asks if you want to look at a tutorial. You can choose yes or no on that. But for a lot of people that aren't familiar with how a tablet works, first-time user experience, it's not necessarily clear how you would work with that app. Now, you play around with it long enough and you'll figure it out. But that's the difference between maybe kids and adults, is adults might be less likely to spend the time to just explore. But when this tutorial comes up, it's just a series of 5 brief tips. But the thing about this is that it's not just relying on that text to fill the needs, although the text is well written, but it's completely in the context of using that app. And you can actually put your fingers on the globe, and you're working with the app as it gives you that instructional information. And so this is a live use of the application with an overlay of that helpful information. And so the look and feel of it conforms to the rest of the application. It's conditional in that it only appears at the first time that you use the application, and you have a choice about using that tutorial or not. And finally, it's concise. It's 5 quick tips. They're very useful tips, and if you get through it, I think it makes it a richer experience in a quicker way for customers. And I wrote a little article about that on my Walensky.com blog, and links at the bottom. And by the way, I'll give you some information about where you can find this information at the end of the presentation. I showed that Xbox game earlier with the Xbox control, and my son's a big gamer, and I was watching him work with it, and he was working with the ability to manipulate this equipment on the Xbox using his using his gestures, but you don't know necessarily right off the bat what gestures would do what. Now, there's a help link on that you can use with a click from the controller. But here you have this very immersive game, this very somewhat realistic, very lifelike game. Everything about it is trying to do that, and then you bring up some help information, and what does it give you? A very traditional help menu where you cycle through select, back, scroll, assemble, firing range. You can barely see it, and it really isn't that useful. It would have been better, I think, to have something up front that shows you how to do it, and maybe uses words that, not that these are bad words, but terms that fit a little bit more into the game. For example, one of the this also operates with voice commands, and one of the commands for voice is the official voice recognition command is choose a section to modify. And that's correct. If you say choose a section to modify, it will have the desired effect in the game. But I'm thinking, I can't imagine my son actually saying choose a section to modify. It kind of sounds ridiculous for somebody playing a game like this. And I asked him, what he would say, and he said, well, I just say to break it down. And I think that's something to think about as well. Is what's the language that is the right one for the right application? Now, people are coming with all kinds of different ways to provide helpful information, and here you can just see, you know, a gallery of different ones, and I've written about a lot of these things in my book and on my blog, but I'm just putting this screen up just to show that organizations are embracing the idea that it's important to have things in the context that conforms to the way that the application works. And the thing I would say for people that are coming from a technical communication background is that it's really important to embrace this as you start working with mobile apps, and recognize that if you are doing some kind of helpful information, then having a help page is a secondary thing that you would want to do if you weren't able to do primary things within the user interface, because you always want to keep people immersed in what they're doing and not require them to go to a separate page, which in the case of a small screen device is actually even more difficult than on the desktop, because there's no windowing for the most part. And so if people have to go to a browser to look at information, then they have to figure out how to navigate back to the app that they were working on. And so the screen captures that are here are taking that approach of having helpful information, but it's very easy to consume it while staying in within the context of the game or the app. Now when you go to tablets, there's a lot more screen real estate to be able to work with, and so you can do more things with it, and so a lot of organizations have done that. The example on the left has entire page worth of information that it uses a really literal description, and you see a lot of tablet apps showing hands and fingers about how to work within the app. And I don't necessarily think it needs to be done, but I can see where you could make an argument to do that. I think that's something that is going to go away in another year or two as people get familiar. It'll be the same as when enough people became familiar with working with a mouse that you don't have to be as literal about it. Although, again, being old, I remember when the mouse first came out that there was a large percentage of computer users who needed a literal representation of what to do with the mouse in addition to working with software. The screen on the right is using an overlay technique that a lot of organizations are using to provide information without taking people too far away from the actual interface. That is an overlay, so you can't actually touch the screen, so it's not the perfect environment. But it does provide you with a layer upon which to then put information about how to work with different parts of the user interface. And again, here I would want to analyze all of the different word and phrase choices to make sure that they were effective. Now, this particular technique, actually, there was a kind of a discussion about it on a LinkedIn discussion group, and so I did a write-up on my thoughts about that, and so you can find that on my blog site as well. Some of the details about overlay, and it also gets into first-time user experience. Now, as I mentioned that I like to analyze different the information that the words that are actually used in the user interface, and Luke Wroblewski and his colleagues a couple years ago put together a really interesting reference guide about touch gestures, and essentially they did all the hard work of going into all of the specifications and documentation for the various platforms that were available, desktop and mobile, and looked at what language, what the vocabulary was for different types of gestures. And you can find all of it in this reference guide. And so that's a useful way to find out what things are called, or what officially things are called. I took that information and I manipulated some of it, and the chart that you see here on screen now is I took that information for iOS, Windows Phone, and Android and laid it out side to side so I could see what the differences are. And you can see for those main verbs that for the most part it's the same. There's only a few variants, and it'll be interesting to see which of those, whether these continue to hold with the general public or not. An interesting like UI description text issue might be looking at the line for drag, where drag is the same on iOS and Android. You see that Windows Phone, actually it's called pan. Well, if you were going to support all the different devices, you'd have to at least think about the issue of whether you want to use drag or pan for Windows Phone. And you could probably argue it either way. But one of the things is if somebody is using a Windows Phone, that's all they use, and maybe it's even something that's used in conjunction with desktop Windows, and pan is what Microsoft uses, then drag may not be the right term to put in there. It may sound a little bit academic, but I think some of these little touches can make a difference. And there's even more interactions added all the time. I put in some ones that were recently added to iOS 6, and I mean, look at those interaction types. They are very obscure, and if somebody builds a feature on that, there needs to be some way for people to understand how to do that. So like smart navigation on a 2-finger double tap. It's pretty obscure. But beyond obscure, it's just that we have to recognize that there's vocabularies for other platforms. So the Microsoft Connect has a gesture language. Windows 8, which is out now, has its own gesture language because of all the new touch capabilities that are part of that. And the Ford Sync has essentially a controlled vocabulary that you need to use in order to get things to happen. And possibly in the future it'll be more it'll react better to full natural language, but right now these controlled vocabularies require the users to know what to say to be able to get certain types of information. And then I don't know what you would do with this chart, but I put it together anyways because it's showing gestures that have already been out there for the desktop for the OS X trackpad and the Magic Mouse and Windows 7 trackpad. And I don't even know who uses all of these gestures, but I think it's interesting to see that they're out there, and apparently there's features that I don't know about, possibly because I would have no idea how to even find where I would even find those features without knowing exactly where to touch. One a related issue that I ran into with translation, that Timeworks case study that I mentioned was translated into Spanish, and so here you see the verb translations. But I compared. I looked at the translations for the same verbs in the Apple documentation, and what I found in the ones that have the asterisks were that if you looked at tap, touch and hold, flick, in various parts of the documentation that the Spanish translation was actually different in different parts of the documentation. And I never had time to follow up to find out whether that was because the context was subtly different and therefore had a different variant, or possibly different translators were working with that, and maybe it should have been standardized on one term, and it wasn't. But if you're doing localization issues with these verbs, then that would be something to think about as you start getting your translations done. I'm just going to just stop for a quick break to take a drink of water. All right, and I am back. Now, assuming that based on the things I already mentioned, you are going to start thinking about possibly using different types of terms for different devices, and so that it's the proper user experience for the appropriate device. Then you have to figure out whether or not you're set up for dealing with different types of screen dimensions and such in the first place. That's kind of a broader issue than this particular talk, and it's something that I talk about separately as multi-screen content authoring. But when I'm doing my work, I try to have a responsive design where the overall layout will gracefully and efficiently adjust to different types of devices in a smart way. But I also like to be smart about the content, have adaptive content, so that I may use different phrases, different terms to be delivered for different types of devices. So I may find that a phrase that I use for a desktop application may not necessarily be what I would want to show for that same activity if somebody's mobile, on the go, and can only glance at the screen. And so if you're going to have that kind of adaptive content, then from a practical perspective, you also have to have some scheme for doing some kind of conditional text where you're tagging information so that your output can be delivered appropriately for different devices. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. So with media query and HTML, CSS technologies, it's possible. Content management systems and many authoring tools can do that. An example that the technical communication constituency would be familiar with would be this screenshot from RoboHelp, which does help authoring. So this might be all of the information that I would have for this particular activity of selecting portfolio elements, including steps, feedback statements, and images. However, I would use features in the software that let me tag it, tag different parts of it, and then would shade it so that I can identify something to be for a large screen versus a phone or a tablet. And then the output would be automatically generated in this way, where you can see that the laptop has the full information, the desktop version. You move over to the phone version, and there's a decision that's been made to not include feedback statements and images. So it's a deprecated amount of content. But also you can notice that the verbs have changed automatically. So for the laptop we have click, for the phone we have tap. For the TV version, it's showing the Microsoft Connect gesture icon for selecting, which is called hover. And when I get into working in when I work on these projects, I set up an interaction table where I know what my equivalent verbs are going to be. So the generic versions might be select, scroll, and move, and then going across I might have click, tap, and then the hand gesture icon. And then as we introduce voice, what the digital or recorded version of the voice might say for a particular verb. Now, at this point, when you look at this is a good time to think about whether or not you can support information that you're presenting on screen with a generic with the generic version of the language or not. Because you can see that if you're able to get away with using the generic verbs, you eliminate a lot of the conditional text work that needs to be done to deal with all those other interaction types. However, I have found that there's times where saying select doesn't really impart the same thing as using a tap or a click, but you have to find that on a case-by-case basis. And I mentioned I mentioned Windows 8, and I think it's interesting to look at what's going on in the instructions that Microsoft is providing about how to do things in Windows 8. If you look in the top screenshot, you can see that they definitely put the touch version kind of in a priority spot. So that first line uses swipe and tap, and then in parenthesis underneath that is the mouse instructions, which I think is kind of odd because I thought that it was the interface was supposed to be interaction neutral, but there's obviously a difference there, some dissonance there. And then you look at the screenshot lower and you see that somebody else was obviously working on this because they're showing both verbs, tap and click. And which is the best way to do it? I'm not sure. Again, I would test it to find out, to get a sense of what users would think would be the right way to go. In terms of working with voice information, we're definitely at an interesting time. Voice technology has been talked about and actually implemented in a lot of ways over the past 20 years, but it's just now that it's starting to come to the forefront as a way that people are regularly going to interact with their devices. And so this is a good time to be thinking about where we're going to go in the future. Most of you are probably familiar with the iOS Siri technology, Google Voice, where you can speak what you're interested in and get a result. But one of the issues there is that, for example, with the iOS Siri technology, there's not an open API for that, so it's only available to specific apps that Apple controls. And ideally, looking to the future, if they came out with an API, then we'd be able to trap for language that is related to our software and then be able to return the appropriate information through Siri. Something like that's already happening on the Windows Phone side. At their build conference at the end of last year, there was a session specifically on the Windows Phone speech enabling API, and you can find my article about it on my blog. Interestingly, I think automotive is somewhat in the lead about bringing voice control to customers. It's been available in the Ford Sync for a while. I just posted a blog article about my experience working with the 2013 Honda Accord voice information, and it's very interesting. It's a very interesting area, but the results are, it's really all over the place. I mean, the systems vary from vehicle to vehicle, from manufacturer to manufacturer. I think there will be some standards that will come along eventually, but they're definitely not there right now. And most of the solutions deal with a control vocabulary. So when you're working with a controlled vocabulary, where there's certain words that people need to speak to be able to have the desired result, then it's really critical that you exhaustively search for all the possible words that people may be using, that you test these words and see if they in fact deserve to be part of this taxonomy. And then you need some way to be able to help people know what those words are. Ideally, that part of the process isn't there, but right now, realistically, it does. And another thing that I found about automotive that's a little bit disjointed is that vehicles for 100 years have been all about knobs and sliders, and they can't get away from knobs and sliders, even though there's now touch interfaces in the center dash. But what you see with these entertainment systems in the vehicles is a voice-enabled, touch-enabled screen that also has a bunch of buttons and sliders underneath it, and you can actually use these in concert, and that's not a real concert. It ends up just being a lot of disjointed noise. But I'm really interested in the automotive user experience, so that's something that I'm going to hopefully be able to keep working on. Well, that brings me to the end of the topics that I want to present. I want to tell you about getting the slides for this presentation. At this point, if you have some questions, you could type those into the chat, and then I could open things up for questions. I want to just switch over to my browser to mention a couple of things. One is that the links in the slides that you'll have will have links to my blog, and so there's a lot of information there in addition that you might be interested in. And also, we're currently doing our skills and technology survey for user assistance, so you might want to check that out. On the UX side, I do want to mention that coming up, start of March, we have our Convey UX conference. I think we have a lot of great speakers. That's in Seattle. It's a 3-day event, and in the information that I'll send you with the links to the slides, I'll also include a promo code for an additional $100 off the current registration rate. So take a look at it. And on the technical communications side, you may be interested in the Writers UA conference. That's going to be that same week, same hotel in Seattle. You could go to both events, but the user assistance part is 2 days. We're trying to do it a faster pace scenario, so a lot of core information presented quickly in 2 days at a lower price than we've been able to do before. And that $100 discount code will also apply to the user assistance conference. And for both of these events, one thing I would ask you is, even if you're not interested in it, if you could forward the info to a couple of your colleagues, and that just helps pay for me putting these presentations together. I'm just looking to see if you have any people that are putting any questions out. So I will be sending you the slides for this presentation. So by signing up for the webinar, I have your email address, and so I'll send you an email that has the links in it. Just looking to see. I don't see any other. Oh, wait. I was looking. There we go. All right. We had a bunch in the middle here. Let's see. Okay, so a question from Rebecca Todd. What is a good strategy for converting a large enterprise software app to touch help? Well, first of all, it depends on what's being converted. And I've found that in most enterprise situations, it's not like the whole enterprise software is moving to a single mobile app. It's more like, okay, the human resources department wants to be able to have certain information while they move around the company, and so we're going to make an app that gives them some subset of that information. Or that when an engineer goes onto the shop floor, there's certain technical specs that would normally be part of that enterprise system, but the app is going to be specifically about the things that that engineer needs. So if that's the scenario that you're running into, then, well, first of all, then you know that you have a smaller subset of information to deal with. If it turns out that you have a real small subset where the app is maybe just doing 2 or 3 functions that on the desktop side might be 20 or 30 functions, then I think you really have to think about getting away from a single source content strategy, and it may be better to really craft that content for the 2 or 3 features and screens that are a part of that app. I think that's the better way to go about it. Now, if it turns out that that you need to be able to support a lot of different features for a mobile app, or let's say you're making documentation that's going to be consumed on a mobile app even if there's no software, then a single source strategy may be involved, in which case then you have to go back to the slide I was talking about, where I still think you need to really look at the differences between the needs for the different platforms. Just taking your full set of documentation and being able to convert it to something that appears in an iPhone, technically you can do it. Realistically and design-wise, it's going to end up being a disaster. And I've seen it happen a lot of times, and it just turns out that mobile users are consuming information in a different way with the different objectives, and so you have to reevaluate all of your content. Let's see, another question from Lyle Turner. Would a word choice conflict regarding your hide button suggest a rethink on the user experience being managed? Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely the case, and so it's a matter of well, in my experience, in my particular case, it was that the app was already out. It was being used, and at that point there wasn't going to be a major change in how that timer recorder was going to work, and so this was an adjustment that made it easier to work with what was there. Could it have been a different way? Well, very likely. If in a future major revision, that would be something that you would definitely want to look at. But even if it was a completely different way of doing it, I would still test the word choices. Even if you came up with an idea that maybe had a smoother transition, if there was any text in there, I would definitely want to make sure that I'm still testing it. Okay, I'm just looking to see. Well, I don't see a lot more questions in addition to that. Oh, let's see. Wait, let's see. There was a question, do all of the gestures work the same in all 3 platforms? I think you might have asked that question when we were in the middle of all of that, so maybe your question was answered, but each platform has a lot of variance. The basic gestures, there seems to be some consensus about what they do, but the developers are also able to adjust what happens when people interact with the device, and so that's part of the issue as well. Is a tap or a tap and hold doing something that represents how what someone would expect when when there's a tap and a hold. So it's more or less the same, but there are a lot of unique aspects across the platforms. Do you think we'll see convergence on terms? And well, there's two sides to that. One is obviously the bigger platforms are going to have more to say about that. So so far you're looking at Apple and Android in terms of their language, but language is also a very personal thing that comes from us as a community using those terms, and we can't always direct where that language is going to go. So I think we just have to kind of monitor, keep an ear out for what the language is, what people are expecting in different situations. It may turn out, for example, that the terms that Microsoft had for Windows Phone that are different from iOS never catch on. But that'll be something we'll just have to wait to see. Let's see, a question from Lauren about how did you get started in UX for mobile apps? Well, that's a good question, and it's the same way that I've gotten involved with all different types of new areas in my career, which is I go looking for some small apps that are created by people in relatively small companies, and I offer to do some work for free. And that gives me a chance to learn some things. It opens up doors a lot quicker, and then I have experience that other people don't have at the same point in time that I can use moving forward. So, but to do that, as an independent contractor, I have to go out there and look for that. Now, if you're working within an organization, the one thing I'll say is to not be expecting that mobile app user assistance work is just going to come walking into your department. It may be that the mobile app development is on a completely different track within your organization. And so you want to keep a lookout for that. And when you see something like that open up, you want to make sure that you find yourself having lunch with and talking with the people that are starting up that effort, so you can make a pitch for contributing the type of experience that you think you can bring to the project. And I've seen this happening a lot, where you have your enterprise application and its associated user assistance team, and the mobile app is related to the enterprise app, but it ends up being in a functionally hierarchically different part of the organization, and so they end up doing something that they end up using people that weren't necessarily part of doing things for the enterprise application. Just looking to see if there's anything else in here. Well, it looks like I think I handled most of those. So again, I'll get that information to you via email. Feel free to email me back if you have some specific questions. Hopefully we can work together again in the future, maybe in a live context. So I'll just end things there and wish you all a lot of luck in the coming year with all your projects. Thank you.